It's always a strange surprise when an actor ends up having a much smaller role in a film than we expected, either because the marketing has cynically overemphasized or lied about the size of their role, or the filmmakers genuinely wanted to pull the rug out from underneath the audience. Take 1989's The Package, for instance. The poster promises an all-you-can-eat Tommy Lee Jones fest, and while he is the main villain, he's not in it nearly enough for me. Like, come on, what are we doing? You promising me Tommy Lee Jones? I want a lot of Tommy Lee Jones. It's not always as personally disappointing like that. Sometimes it can be surprising. But it's a feature of films to this day, so why not take a look at some of the newer examples? I'm Ewan, you're watching What Culture, and here are 10 actors in recent movies way less than expected. Number 10. Aaron Taylor-Johnson, 28 years later. The brilliant trailers for 28 Years Later were largely centered around the exploits of Aaron Taylor-Johnson's Jamie and his young son Spike, played by Alfie Williams, leading audiences to quite understandably assume that they were basically the long-awaited horror sequel's joint protagonists. Also, apologies to all the Geordies in the audience. I live in Newcastle, and that was my best attempt at an accent. And while this absolutely seems to be the case for the film's first act, Jamie is slowly transitioned out of the story thereafter, as the focus shifts to Alfie heading out into the mainland with his mother Isla, played by Jodie Comer, in the hopes of curing her illness. By the film's midpoint, Taylor-Johnson is basically out of the movie, and we only see him again for one brief additional scene at the very end, almost a full hour after Jamie had been previously seen. Granted, the film certainly doesn't hurt for Taylor-Johnson's absence, in large part because Williams, Comer, and a very game Ralph Fiennes are themselves so compelling to watch, but it was still hugely unexpected for the actor to dip out so early, especially as he wasn't killed off. Also, as an aside, Ralph Fiennes probably coming in with my favorite performance of the year so far. 15 minutes or so of just absolute perfection, to be honest. Number 9. David Harbour, A Working Man. On paper, David Harbour sounded like a fine addition to the latest Jason Statham movie, A Working Man. A wisecracking side character who can inject some levity and a little Star Wattage into proceedings. Harbour plays Gunny Lefferty, a blind ex-Marine who basically serves as protagonist Levin Cade's counsel throughout the movie. But honestly, even that might be generously overselling just how much Harbour is in the film. The actor ultimately shows up for just 3 short scenes throughout the film, where he has some brief chit-chat with the Stath and, yeah, that's all it has for us. No, seriously, Harbour's screen time here is barely more than 5 minutes, and we get so little insight into who Gunny is that it can't not feel like a massive waste of his acting talents. Given the obvious appeal of seeing Harbour sink his teeth into a juicy supporting role and exchange pulpy dialogue with Statham, what a colossally squandered opportunity that his presence was here. But hopefully he got a nice payday for it. Number 8. Pom Clementif, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. It's painfully clear watching Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning that director Christopher McQuarrie struggled to make room for the series' ever-ballooning ensemble, which sadly came at the expense of one of the coolest threads left dangling by the previous film, Dead Reckoning, previously titled Dead Reckoning Part 1. At the conclusion of the penultimate Mission Impossible, Paris, played by Pom Clementif, an assassin working for Isai Morales' Gabriel, betrays her leader and is left for dead, leading to Tom Cruise's Ethan Hunt and Haley Atwell's Grace to rescue her with a clear view to a rematch with Paris as a member of Hunt's team. Paris was a big highlight of Dead Reckoning, rocking a killer, clownish, almost mimey assassin vibe and absolutely tearing up the frame whenever she was on screen. The hope was there that she'd get to do more of the same in The Final Reckoning, but she's basically just a member of the background, always on hand to assist, but never having a moment to really jump out and engage in the kind of physicality she showed in the previous film. I really enjoyed The Final Reckoning for the most part, especially because it had a bonus Holt McCallany appearance, and I love that man, but Paris was the clear loser in terms of unmet expectations. Number 7. Ralph Macchio, Karate Kid Legends. Karate Kid Legends was sold to fans as an event movie which would finally unite the original Karate Kid era and the 2010 remake under the same roof, by pairing original lead Daniel LaRusso, played by Ralph Macchio, with the remake's Mr. Miyagi stand-in Mr. Han, played by Jackie Chan, as they trained a young martial artist called Lee, played by Ben Wang. And while this technically does happen, it's ultimately way less of a fixture than you'd reasonably assume from the marketing. That's because Daniel doesn't actually show up until the third act of the movie, and considering that Karate Kid Legends is just 94 minutes long, it means Ralph Macchio is really only in it for about 15 to 20 minutes. To make matters worse, the film doesn't really do anything interesting with him either, and his sentimental interactions with Mr. Han mostly feel forced and unconvincing. Yeah, quite why anyone wanted to make this movie and not give Daniel a major front and center role is totally baffling, especially considering just how big Cobra Kai was compared to the overall non-entity that the 2010 movie actually is. Which I also just learned made over $300 million at the box office. I'm guessing we were all pretty bored that week in 2010? Number 6. Stanley Tucci, Fountain of Youth. When Stanley Tucci is cast in a globe-trotting action-adventure movie, even one that is going straight to streaming, you can probably reasonably assume that he's most likely going to be playing the big bad. And it was certainly a reasonable assumption to make for his role in Guy Ritchie's Fountain of Youth. But Tucci actually plays a benevolent character, the elder of the Protectors of the Path, who is tasked with preserving the Fountain of Youth and keeping it out of villainous hands. It's basically a Basil exposition role, where the Elder reminds Esme, played by Isa Gonzalez, of the stakes if the Fountain of Youth is, unearthed and drank from. And while you might expect to see Tucci hammered up for at least a few scenes, he's only in the movie for one scene, and that one scene lasts like 2 minutes tops. Yeah, this is about as blatant as paycheck roles come. Given that Tucci lives in London where the movie was shot, the entire role, including learning his lines, probably took an afternoon. Probably. To Apple's very mild credit though, at least they didn't put his name or face on the movie's posters. Number 5. Rachel Brosnahan, The Amateur. Even accepting that the trailers made it pretty clear that protagonist Charlie Heller's wife Sarah is killed off early in the movie, though many suspected it was in fact a fake-out, you probably assumed an actress of Rachel Brosnahan's stature would get a ton of worthwhile establishing scenes throughout the first act. But no, that's not what happens at all. Ultimately, Sarah is featured in just 2 brief scenes at the start of The Amateur and killed off barely 10 minutes into the runtime, at which point you kinda have to wonder why cast an actress as good as Rachel Brosnahan at all if that's what you're just gonna do to her. Sarah does at least show up for a brief mid-film flashback, but even so, Brosnan's screen time ends up totaling a paltry 5 minutes. Considering the gravitas she could have brought to the character in the early going and perhaps made us all care just a little bit more about Charlie's revenge mission, it felt like a total waste to send Brosnan packing quite so swiftly. Number 4. Courtney B Vance, Lilo and Stitch. Apart from the fact that it was even made, one of the biggest disappointments in the live-action Lilo and Stitch remake is the reduced role of one of the original animation's most beloved characters, social worker Cobra Bubbles, played here by the great Courtney B Vance. For inexplicable reasons, I guess, Bubbles is barely in the first half of the movie at all, instead being replaced by a new social worker character called Mrs. Kakoa, played by Tia Carrere. Only in the second half of the story does Bubbles do much of anything, and even then, it's still in a seriously dialed-back capacity compared to the source material. And this is without even getting into the controversial decision to rework Bubbles from a CIA agent turned social worker into a CIA agent who is merely posing as a social worker. She's just nowhere near as fun. None of the changes made to the character in this remake were for the better, and only ensured that an actor as ludicrously talented as Courtney B Vance was given less to work with. Seriously, Disney, please just pack these live-action remakes in. I know they make a lot of money, and you'll never do that because they make a lot of money, but please, they're so bad. Number 3. Craig Lamar trailer, Rener. Shortly after Frankie Muniz was announced to be starring in a new sci-fi thriller called Rener, and no, it isn't a dystopian retelling of the rise and fall of Jeremy Renner's app, although I would absolutely go watch that movie, the big surprise here is that it was actually going to be an unexpected Malcolm in the Middle reunion. And that's cool because we all love Malcolm in the Middle, and if you don't, well, you're wrong. The movie's marketing team confirmed that Muniz would be starring alongside Craig Lamar Trailer, who unforgettably played Malcolm's asthmatic friend Stevie on the show. Numerous behind-the-scenes photos were released of the pair together, and Muniz even said in interviews how thrilled he was to be working with Trailer once again. And so, what a big disappointment it was that Trailer is ultimately only in the movie for a mere matter of seconds. He appears early on as one of protagonist Rener's neighbors who passes by him in the hallway of their apartment building, and then returns for a post-credits gag where his Alexa assistant has been replaced by the AI Salinas, played by Marcia Gay Harden. Granted, Taylor hasn't really been acting much since his Malcolm days, but considering how heavily the marketing leaned on this Malcolm reunion, it sure seemed like he was going to be here for a decently sized supporting part at the very least. Number 2. Olga Kurylenko, Thunderbolts. Though the marketing for Thunderbolts billed Olga Kurylenko's Taskmaster as a core member of the anti-hero supergroup, many attentive fans assumed from her minimal presence and trailer group shots that she'd get killed off relatively early on, say at the end of the first act. But as it turns out, Taskmaster perishes just 18 minutes into the movie, being shot in the head by Hannah John Kamen's ghost in the heat of battle. To further sprinkle some salt into the wound, Taskmaster only enters the film less than 2 minutes prior, ensuring Kurylenko's role here is a brutally short cameo she presumably shot in just a few hours. And considering that almost all of Kurylenko's screen time is spent underneath the mask and performing stunts, one can imagine she was probably on set for even less time than one might initially think. Accepting that many fans felt Taskmaster was given an underwhelming introduction in Black Widow, this utterly thankless and very final cameo only left fans all the more frustrated. And number 1. Henry Golding, Another Simple Favor. Given the sizable role he had in the first A Simple Favor, it was reasonable to assume that Henry Golding would be back for another substantial appearance in sequel Another Simple Favor, where he plays femme fatale Emily Nelson's ex-husband, Sean. But Golding ends up taking an early exit when, all of a sudden, he's injected with poison while showering, causing him to fatally hemorrhage from his eyes, nose, mouth, and you get the idea. He collapses and dies. This happens at the end of the movie's first act, ensuring Golding ends up having a significantly curtailed part compared to the first film. And considering that Sean is one of the original film's more memorable supporting characters, it was a huge shame to see him dispatched so early on this time around, even if he at least got a memorably gnarly demise. On the flip side, at least Golding was able to exit this one before it went totally off the rails because, yeah, not a good movie, but still, cool death.